Okay, my name is Ed Long, and I've been working as an analog and radio frequency design engineer for most of my working life. I've enjoyed most of the work I've done and the challenges you get in designing things and fixing problems. Now this talk covers the goals of companies. I'll explain as I continue and why I think I've got some insights into this area that may be useful to others. Around 15 years ago I was working for a major Japanese company at the time of the UK government's 3G auction. I was originally employed by the company as a radio design engineer. And after about a year they decided they didn't want to do radio engineering in the department in which I worked, so I was given a job at their head office. This job was to develop a business plan for electronic music distribution. Now I don't believe I was giving any further instructions after this, so I had to work out what electronic music distribution was firstly, and even what a business plan should consist of. These were interesting times in the development of mobile phones. Before I started work on my business plan, I'd been attending the UK government's third generation advisory group, and some interesting things were going on here. To backtrack slightly, just to give a background to this technology, mobile phones initially used analog modulation. This was what was called the first generation, or later was called the first generation. At the time it didn't need a name. And the second generation was a speech mobile phone that used digital modulation. The maximum data rate would be 10 kilobits per second. That would be a fast enough data rate to give speech transmission digitally encoded, but not fast enough for data communications. So the third generation was designed to enhance the available data rates on a mobile phone network and to enable the revolution of mobile internet, or you might say mobile data applications more generally. So when we were going to the UK TAG, UK Third Generation Advisory Group, there was much talk about the great benefits of mobile data communications and how this market was going to explode. And there were many presentations showing scenarios such as somebody climbing Everest and downloading a map of where he was going over a 3G network, and various other things were shown, maps, some things which have come about as well, but some data applications are high resolution and fast data rates over a mobile phone network. Anyway, when I started work on the business plan in what was called the Multimedia Promotions Office, I also became the go-to person in the company for entrepreneurs who wanted to present their business plans to the company. So I got to review a lot of business plans. Of course, they're all put together by businessmen, as you'd expect for a business plan. So one plan, taken here as an example, was to transmit electronic music downloads over digital audio broadcasting. And in reviewing their proposal, I found it was technically incorrect. You couldn't do what they were supporting. Couldn't do what they were suggesting. DAB is obviously a broadcasting network and one directional, and this hadn't been fully understood or conveyed in the business plan. So the company that I was dealing with and the company I was working for had a team working on the plan, because these were quite high profile corporate guys, but when I pointed out the flaws in the technical structure of the business plan, they changed it overnight. So this didn't inspire confidence, and gradually this plan went by the wayside. This was the same story for nearly all of the business plans submitted to me during this period. The result of my 2 years in the Multimedia Promotions Office was the rejection of 30 or so business plans and 2 investments, one of which made the company some money. The other one was a very small investment and didn't really go anywhere. But the other thing I want to cover here is the 3G auction, which relates to this. And at the time, many companies who I think should have known better lost a great deal of money. At the time, I did a paper summarising my conclusions called The Next 10 Years in the Music Business. And it predicted a maximum data rate of 56 kilobits per second over a fully developed 3G network. Now, a few years later, this doesn't even raise an eyebrow. But in 2001, it was shocking to many people. There were a lot of predictions of 2 megabits per second and a revolution in mobile phone usage. Now, when you attended UK TAG, UK Third Generation Advisory Group, you couldn't really say these things very easily. There was a lot of presentation of high-speed networks and so forth, and obviously it was an auction, and there were some people that were interested in, particularly the government, making money on the auction. And so the idea that this wasn't everything it was cracked up to be wasn't one to spread about too much. But anyway, I wrote this paper. It didn't receive wide circulation. It was internal to the company, but the people that read it were quite shocked by the fact that this was the maximum data rate. Even 56 kilobits per second is not a maintained data rate even now on third generation networks. It's probably more like 30 or 35 kilobits per second average, which is what I predicted 15 years ago. So why does this matter? Well, Marconi's, as one example, sold a lot of their defence interests and diversified into mobile phones, anticipating the third generation revolution, and promptly went bankrupt. I could mention a number of other companies that did the same thing and lost out heavily. One company I worked for later survived this, but they had established an offshoot to exploit the third generation revolution by making components for it, and that offshoot of the company had lost a lot of money and had been closed down. So that was another company that didn't do well during this period. Even Ericsson, a major force in mobile phones, lost a great deal of money on infrastructure because the market didn't advance according to the best predictions. And I can think of another company, can't remember their name, but they lost loads of money and went bust. So there was a lot of heartache during this period of the 3G revolution. Okay, now let's say that all business failures are failures of management. They have to be, really, don't they? Because management are there to run the company. So you could say it's market forces, but then management are there to predict the effect of market forces. So when we look through the business plans I reviewed and the business disasters from mobile phone and infrastructure companies, there is a common theme. There wasn't enough engineering detail to predict the future correctly. So let's look at this a little bit more. So let's say, let's look at why this became an issue. Let's say you're doing a business plan for a fruit shop. So you'd work out where to site your shop, where to buy your fruit from, and how much profit you would make from each piece of fruit, and how that would enable you to pay your bills of premises, wages, and other bills. Simple, although plenty of opportunities for making mistakes. So you would need to get data about other fruit shops and how they're done, the foot traffic in the area where you operate, what percentage of pedestrians buy fruit, and so forth. The concept's quite simple, but a lot of work would have to go into this business plan. And the accuracy of your business plan, how much you've predicted the future, which is the point I'm driving at here, would depend totally on the accuracy of your data. You could surmise that if your data was 100% accurate, you would be able to develop a 100% accurate business plan. So what's the difference with technology? Well, there really isn't any difference, except for this. As I mentioned earlier, business plans are normally put together by business people. For the example of the fruit stall, the business person is probably somebody who's worked in the fruit stall before, or in the fruit industry, and knows the margins on fruit and hence can put a business plan together. However, when we go into the technical area, this is less likely to be true, and that's where a lot of this kind of business plan fall down. They're put together by managers and business people and don't have a sufficiently comprehensive technical insight into what is happening. So looking back at the period when we're moving from 2G to 3G again, around 2000, a book by Christensen, which is very much recommended and I'll mention again at the end, has this rule: markets that don't exist can't be analysed. So if we look at the emergence of the IBM PC as another unrelated strand that's a different business, there is a big element of this. So with the IBM PC, nobody really understood what it was for, probably at the time it was launched. There were no applications for it, and probably not even word processors at the time of launch. And so nobody really understood what was going to happen with the PC, and I think everyone, maybe not everyone, but a majority certainly of people were surprised when PCs started taking off like a rocket. And another firm that caught a cold at this time was DEC Computers. This is mentioned in Christensen's book again. DEC were making the VAX machine, which was very successful, an office computer, mini computer, and they tried to produce PCs and couldn't produce a cost base that would enable them to produce PCs, or competitive PCs. But this isn't quite the scene with the 2G, 3G revolution. There was a market that didn't exist, mobile data applications, but it was very closely related to a market that did exist, mobile voice applications. And so my contention is that in this case the market could be analysed. So let's come back to what this means for a company trying to survive in a challenging environment. Of course, pretty much every environment is challenging. It's very rare you get a sort of monopoly in a product that you don't have to compete with. So the answer is that you need to, as a manager, you need to ignore the hype and the marketing, and you need to know the technology of the business you're running. Fairly obvious statements. That's the only safe way to run a business. Then you can spot opportunities, and you can also spot liabilities in your strategy. The last statement I've made covers a lot of ground, and I may do another talk on how you go about this, but that's the basic message of this talk. One of the managers of Toshiba years ago said it's an oddity that in the UK companies are run by managers, by accountants, I think he said, which is probably often true, and in Japan they're run by engineers, and that's an interesting insight. So the message is, even as a manager, you need to get a full understanding of the technology you're working with in your company. You need to ignore marketing, you need to ignore all this sort of thing and get down to hard tacks on what technology am I going to use here, and make sure you know that that technology actually does what it says it will do. I'll mention a few books here. I could do a longer talk on this, and I may do another one, but I'll mention a few books here. The first one is the book I mentioned, and I found this very, very valuable during this period and very interesting to read. It's called The Innovator's Dilemma by Clayton M. Christensen, and it goes into detail on the evolution of the hard disk industry particularly, and it's very interesting to read. It's got lots of graphical data. I found it totally absorbing.